Stop! It's a trap! Get lost! The bridge! Someone cut the supports last night. 3 men. I watched them do it. You're crazy. Move! Please. You cross that bridge. None of you come back. The bikers shoved past her. 18 engines roared to life. Lily Carver dropped to her knees in the middle of the parking lot. Barefoot, homeless, 21 years old. She had nothing. No phone, no family, no voice that anyone in Kettleton, Alabama had ever thought was worth hearing. She'd run 2 miles on empty asphalt before sunrise to save 18 strangers. Not one of them believed her. She pressed her palms flat against the hot concrete and whispered to herself, the way her grandmother Ruth had taught her to pray when the world stopped listening. At the back of the pack, one man's eyes narrowed. He looked at her. Really looked. Not through her. At her. Then he killed his engine. What happened after that? This town has never been the same. This is Heart Tales. Let's go back to where it all started. Everybody shut your engines off. Jack Mercer hadn't moved from his bike, hadn't raised his voice, but something in the way he said it made 17 men reach for their throttles at the same time. 18 engines died. The forecourt went silent so fast you could hear the creek running somewhere behind the tree line. Bobby Crane swung around. Jack, come on, we've got 400 miles. Bobby, that was all. One word. Bobby stopped. Jack climbed off his bike and walked toward Lily. Not fast. Not slow. The walk of a man who had already made a decision and was now executing it. He stopped 2 feet in front of her and looked at her the way nobody in Kettleton had looked at her in 13 months, like she was worth listening to. Say it again, he said. From the beginning, slower. Lily's throat moved. Her bare feet were bleeding where the asphalt had cut them on the run-in. Harlan Creek Bridge, Route 12, 2 miles south. Last night, around 2 in the morning. 3 men. Angle grinder. Under the bridge, the support beams on the west span. She stopped, drew a breath. The man who set it up, Dale Whitmore. He owns the Copper Spike Bar on Cumberland Street. I heard him say. Her voice cracked, held. 18 bikes at full speed. She won't hold past the second span. Nobody moved. Bobby's jaw tightened. She's making it up. Maybe. Jack didn't look at Bobby. Reed Halston was already off his bike, already cleaning his glasses. His tell, the one the whole group knew, meant something had his full attention and wasn't letting go. He was former Navy, structural engineer, 22 years building things the government didn't discuss publicly. If 5-6 primary beams are cut at 80% depth, 18 bikes at highway speed on a downhill approach. He said it flat, no drama, just numbers. Dynamic load fails the span in 2, maybe 3 seconds. Deck drops, bikes go with it. How far down? Bobby said. 30 feet. Reed paused. Limestone creek bed. Dry season. The pump next to Jack's bike was still running. Clicking off gallons into a tank nobody was thinking about anymore. Show us, Jack said to Lily. Dale Whitmore was still in the doorway of Harlan's Gas and Supply. He'd been standing there since Lily first opened her mouth. Coffee cup in one hand, the other hand loose at his side, watching. Jack looked at him once on the way past. Dale looked back. Jack kept walking. Vic, already on him. Vic Donahue didn't look up from where he was leaning against his bike, arms folded, eyes forward. 58 years old. Retired drill sergeant. Hadn't needed to raise his voice in 9 years. Dale didn't move from the doorway. The path along Harlan Creek was packed red clay and loose gravel. Lily walked it without slowing. Jack followed. Reed had his canvas kit over one shoulder. Bobby trailed at the back, arms crossed, mouth shut. The posture of a man who wanted to be wrong. Nobody talked. Quarter mile around the bend, the bridge came through the trees. Old. 2 lanes. Steel girder construction. Rust on the railings. A county route marker so sun-bleached the number was gone. The kind of bridge you cross without thinking about it. The kind of bridge a whole town stopped thinking about the day the bypass opened. Looks fine to me, Bobby said. It's not on top. Lily pointed to the west embankment, where the bank sloped down to the creek bed. Underneath, the support beams. Jack went down first. He slid down the embankment, boots hitting the mud at the bottom, and ducked under the bridge deck. He looked up. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Reed, Now. Reed came down fast, nearly lost his footing on the wet clay. Flashlight out before he hit the bottom. He put the beam on the first crossbeam. The cut was clean, diagonal, deep. The metal edges still bright silver. No rust, no oxidation. Fresh. Reed moved the light. Second beam. Same cut. Third, fourth, fifth. 5 out of 8 primary support beams on the west span. Reed opened his notebook. His voice went flat, the way it went when numbers stopped being abstract and started being real. These cuts are less than 10 hours old. Angle and kerf depth consistent with a 4-inch angle grinder at 11,000 RPM. This is not fatigue. This is not age. He wrote something down. At full dynamic load, 18 bikes, throttle open, downhill grade. This span fails in under 3 seconds. Deck separates. Everything on it goes down. He stopped writing. 30 feet onto dry limestone. The creek murmured past them in the silence. Bobby had come down the bank without anyone noticing. He was standing behind Reed now, staring at the 5th beam. His jaw was open. "That's not weathering," he said quietly. "That's a saw cut." "Angle grinder," Reed said. "Rented. Any hardware store." Bobby turned around and looked at Lily. She was standing at the top of the bank, barefoot in the mud and rock, arms at her sides, waiting for someone to tell her she'd imagined it. Jack climbed back up. He stood at the top of the bank and looked at Lily for a long moment. "You ran 2 miles to tell us that." "Not a question," she nodded. "Before sunrise. Barefoot." She nodded again. "And we told you to get lost." She didn't answer that one. She didn't need to. Jack turned to Reed. "Get everything on video before we touch anything. Every beam, every cut, every angle. Timestamps." He was already pulling out his phone. "Bobby, go back up. Nobody leaves that forecourt. Nobody." He paused. "Make sure Whitmore's still at the pump." Bobby was already moving up the bank. Jack put the phone to his ear. "FBI field office in Birmingham." He looked at Lily while it rang. "We've got documented evidence of attempted murder of 18 people. And we need someone who actually examines a crime scene." He looked back at the bridge, then at Lily. "You said you sleep under this bridge." 11 months, she said. He reached into his vest and took out his riding gloves. Held them out. She looked at them, then at him. "Your feet," he said. "Ground's rough going back." She took them. That was the moment Bobby Crane, ex-Army, built like a truck, first one to tell her to get lost, pressed his fist against his mouth and looked away. "Now you need to understand something about Lily Carver. She wasn't supposed to be awake at 2 in the morning. Wasn't supposed to hear anything. Wasn't supposed to be the one person in Kettleton, Alabama, who stood between 18 men and a bridge that would have killed every last one of them. But she was there. She heard it. And she ran. To understand why that took everything she had, we need to go back 13 months. To a house on Sycamore Road with a yellow porch light, and the smell of cornbread through the screen door, and a woman named Ruth Carver who believed that doing the right thing was the only thing worth doing, even when it cost you everything. That's where this story starts. 13 months ago, Lily Carver had a home. It wasn't much. A narrow wood frame house at the end of Sycamore Road, with a screen door that stuck in summer, and a porch light Ruth left on every night without exception. Even when Lily was grown, even when there was no reason anymore except habit, and the belief that a light in the dark was never wasted. The house smelled like cornbread and motor oil. Ruth Carver had cooked every evening of her life, and spent every Saturday morning tinkering with the ancient Buick in the carport that hadn't run since 2009. She kept working on it anyway. Said the point wasn't the destination. Said the point was knowing how something worked. Lily had grown up watching those hands. Ruth was 67 years old and had raised Lily from the age of 4. The year Lily's mother drove to Birmingham for a job interview and didn't come back. Not dead, just gone. The kind of gone that doesn't leave a forwarding address. And Lily's father was a first name on a birthday card that stopped arriving when she was 6. So it was just the two of them, on Sycamore Road, in Kettleton, Alabama, population 4,312. Ruth worked the early shift at the county records office for 21 years, got up at 5, drove the Buick when it ran, and walked when it didn't. Came home by 3:30 every afternoon, with her shoes worn down and her back aching, and made dinner like it was the most important thing she'd done all day. Some nights it was. "Come read to me," she'd say, settling into the armchair by the window after dinner. Lily would bring whatever she'd checked out from the Kettleton Public Library that week. History, mostly. Engineering. Anything that explained how the world held itself together. "You read that one already," Ruth would say. "It's better the second time." Ruth laughed at that. Every time. Then came October. The cough that didn't stop. The doctor in Anniston said pneumonia. Said Ruth needed the hospital. Said it wasn't optional. Ruth said she'd think about it. Ruth did not go. By November, she couldn't get out of the armchair without help. By the third week of November, she couldn't get out of bed. Lily slept on the floor of Ruth's room for 11 days. She learned to check a pulse by pressing 2 fingers against the inside of a wrist. She learned that the sound of shallow breathing at 3 in the morning is the loneliest sound in the world. She called 911 on a Tuesday when Ruth stopped responding to her name. Ruth died in the ambulance on the way to Anniston Regional. Lily was holding her hand when the paramedic said it. She didn't let go until they pulled into the bay, and someone gently, firmly, moved her arm away. She was 20 years old. The bank took the house 63 days later. Unpaid mortgage. Ruth had been behind for years, stretching every dollar across rent and groceries and Lily's community college tuition until there was nothing left to stretch. Lily found the stack of past due notices in the kitchen drawer 3 weeks after the funeral, rubber banded together, each one more final than the last. She stood on the Sycamore Road sidewalk on a Thursday morning in February and watched a man in a gray Chevrolet pull up, unlock the front door, and change the deadbolt. He had a clipboard. He didn't look at her once. She tried the Kettleton Women's Shelter on Dexter Avenue. Full. Waitlist of 11. She tried the First Baptist Food Pantry on Green Street. Pastor Dennis said he'd put her on the prayer list. The prayer list didn't have a bed. She called the county housing office from a payphone outside the Dollar General. Automated system. Press 1 for English. Press 2 for Spanish. Press 3 to be placed on hold for 40 minutes before the line disconnected. So Lily found the bridge. Harlan Creek Bridge was old and forgotten, and almost entirely useless since the Route 47 bypass had opened in 2011. Nobody drove it anymore, except locals cutting through to the Creekside farms, and not many of those. The county kept it on the maintenance schedule, but hadn't actually maintained it since a cursory inspection in 2019. Underneath the west embankment, where the concrete abutment met the bank at an angle, there was a shallow alcove, maybe 6 feet deep, 4 feet wide, high enough to sit upright if you tucked your knees. Lily lined it with cardboard from behind the Dollar General and a sheet of corrugated tin she dragged from a demolition pile on Route 12. It kept the rain off, mostly. Kettleton, Alabama. Population 4,312. Most of them knew Lily Carver existed. None of them did anything about it. Mrs. Hargrove, who ran Hargrove's General on Main Street, had called the police on Lily twice. Once for sheltering in the doorway during a thunderstorm, once for using the outdoor water spigot to wash her face. "You're bad for business," she said. She said it the way you say something you've decided is simply true. Sheriff Roy Cobb had stopped Lily on the street 3 times in 6 months. Vagrancy warnings. The third time, he put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed, and said if he saw her near the businesses on Main Street again, he'd process her. He said it quietly, almost kindly, the way a man talks when he's practiced the words. The gas station on Route 12, Harlan's Gas and Supply, run by Tommy Garrett, was the only place in town Lily could use a bathroom without being told to leave. Tommy was 24 and working the overnight shift, and had never once asked her to move along. He left the side door unlocked after 10 p.m. and pretended not to notice when she slipped in to use the restroom and fill her water bottle at the sink. He never said anything about it. She never thanked him. That was the arrangement, and it worked. The only person in Kettleton who treated Lily like a person was Walter Pruitt. Walter was 69 years old and ran a one-man auto repair shop off Route 12 called Pruitt's, a cinder block building with a hand-painted sign and 3 bays and a coffee maker that ran all day. He had hands like a man who had used them for 50 years and hadn't stopped. He drove a 1987 Ford pickup that he'd rebuilt twice and planned to rebuild a third time. Every few days, Walter left a brown paper bag on the railing of Harlan Creek Bridge, a biscuit wrapped in foil, an apple, sometimes a bottle of Gatorade. He never made anything of it, never asked how she was doing. He'd nod if he saw her on the road and keep driving. Once, in December, he left a sleeping bag still in the plastic wrap, store-bought, rated to 20 degrees, and underneath it, a flashlight with a note written on a Pruitt's auto receipt. For reading. Lily kept that flashlight under her blanket every night. Charged it at Tommy Garrett's outlet when Tommy wasn't watching. It was the most valuable thing she owned. She was 21 years old. She had been sleeping under a bridge for 11 months. She had a library card, a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and a paperback history of the Tennessee Valley Authority she'd checked out 4 times. She had read the chapter on bridge engineering 6 times. Which is why, when she heard the angle grinder start up under Harlan Creek Bridge at 2:17 in the morning, she knew exactly what she was hearing. Stay with me. Because what she heard that night, and what she decided to do about it, is the part nobody in Kettleton saw coming. Now, before we get to that night, you need to understand one thing about Dale Whitmore. He wasn't always the man standing in a gas station doorway watching 18 people nearly ride to their deaths and doing nothing about it. He used to be something else entirely. And understanding what he became, and why, is the only way to understand how a plan like that gets made. How a man convinces himself that 18 strangers are an acceptable price for saving his own skin. We'll get there. But first, the night before everything, 2:17 in the morning, Harlan Creek Bridge. Lily was awake because she was always awake at 2 in the morning in summer. The heat under the bridge stayed past midnight. She was lying on top of her sleeping bag with the flashlight off, reading by memory, running the TVA chapter in her head the way she'd learned to when she wanted to sleep but couldn't. Then she heard it. The sound started low, a whine, mechanical, coming from underneath the bridge, from the west side, where the embankment dropped down to the creek bed. Lily sat up. She knew that sound. Every mechanic's granddaughter knows that sound. An angle grinder running at full RPM has a specific pitch, high and grinding and sustained, not like a saw, not like a drill, like something being eaten through slowly by something that doesn't stop. Walter Pruitt had one in his second bay. She'd heard it 100 times through the cinder block wall, while she waited for him to finish a job before he'd pretend not to notice her filling her water bottle at his outdoor spigot. This was that sound. At 2:17 in the morning, under a bridge. She didn't move for 30 seconds. Then she did. She came down the embankment from the east side, the opposite bank, moving slow, staying in the tree shadow, placing each foot before she committed her weight. The creek was low enough in August to cross on the stones without getting above the ankle. She crossed. She pressed herself against the concrete abutment on the west side and looked around the corner. 3 men, one running the grinder, one holding a work light, one standing back with his arms folded, watching. The posture of a man supervising rather than working. They had a truck parked up on Route 12 with the headlights off. She could see the dark silhouette of it through the bridge deck above. She couldn't see their faces in the dark, but she could see the man who was watching. She knew the shape of him, wide through the shoulders, the way he stood with his weight on his left foot. The specific stillness of a man who was used to being the one other men checked on. She'd seen Dale Whitmore stand exactly like that 100 times from a distance. Outside the Copper Spike at closing time. In the parking lot of the county courthouse the morning of the liquor license hearing last spring. At the Route 12 intersection on Thursday evenings when he drove past on his way to wherever he went on Thursday evenings. She pressed her back against the concrete and didn't breathe. The grinder stopped. One of the men said something she couldn't hear. Dale said something back. Then she heard it clearly. Because Dale wasn't a man who lowered his voice when he was certain he was alone. 18 bikes at full speed. She won't hold past the second span. A pause. What about the girl under the bridge? Dale didn't answer right away. The work light shifted. She's not here. Hasn't been here in 2 nights. She found somewhere else. He was wrong. She had been somewhere else. 2 nights sheltering in the doorway of the closed laundromat on Green Street, after Sheriff Cobb's 3rd warning. She'd come back yesterday morning. The grinder started again. Lily stayed against the abutment for 4 minutes. Counted the seconds. Didn't move. Then she crossed the creek stones back to her side, climbed the embankment, and sat on her sleeping bag in the dark with her knees pulled to her chest. She stayed like that until the truck started up on Route 12 and drove away north, 3:12 in the morning. She checked by the angle of the stars. Ruth had taught her that, Years before the flashlight, years before the library card. Then she thought about what to do. Here is the thing about asking for help when nobody in a town has looked at you straight for 11 months. You stop believing your own voice matters. It's not a dramatic thing. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way rust happens. Slowly, in the places you can't see, until one day you press on something that used to be solid, and it gives way. Lily sat in the dark under Harlan Creek Bridge until 4 in the morning, running through the list. Walter Pruitt. She could go to Walter. But Walter was 69 years old with a bad hip and a landline phone, and no reason anyone would listen to him about 18 bikers she'd heard about from a conversation under a bridge in the middle of the night. She couldn't bring Walter into this. Tommy Garrett at the gas station. Tommy was kind. Tommy would listen. Tommy was also 24 years old and on the overnight shift and would have to call Sheriff Roy Cobb. Sheriff Roy Cobb, who had squeezed her shoulder and told her not to come back to Main Street, who drove past the Copper Spike every Thursday evening and whose cruiser sometimes stayed in the lot behind it past midnight. She'd seen that too. The county sheriff's office in Anniston. 22 miles north with no car, no phone, no way to get there before sunrise, and no guarantee anyone there would treat a homeless woman's middle-of-the-night claim any differently than Cobb would. She thought about Ruth. Ruth Carver had not been a woman who talked about courage the way people talk about courage in speeches, like it was a thing you summoned, a resource you drew down. Ruth talked about it the way she talked about everything mechanical, like it was a function, like it either worked or it didn't, and the only way to know was to try it. The hardest part isn't being brave, she told Lily once. They were sitting on the Sycamore Road porch. The summer Lily was 18. The summer everything still felt possible. The hardest part is being brave when you already know it probably won't work. Lily had been talking about something small then, a school thing, a situation with a teacher who wouldn't listen. Ruth had answered like it was the most important question in the world, because Ruth answered everything like that. You do it anyway, she said. Not because it'll work, because you're the one who knows, and knowing and doing nothing, that's a weight you carry a long time. She'd picked up Lily's hand and looked at it, turned it over, pressed her thumb against the center of Lily's palm the way she did when she was making a point she wanted to stay. You do it anyway, baby. Lily made her decision at 4:14 in the morning. She would go to the bikers directly. She didn't know who they were. She'd heard the engines the previous afternoon when they'd passed through on Route 12 heading south. 18 Harleys in formation, the sound rolling through the creek valley like thunder. And she'd seen the route. Whoever they were coming back through. And Route 12 south meant Harlan Creek Bridge. She had one chance, one window. The time between when they stopped for fuel at Harlan's Gas and Supply on Route 12, the only station south of the county line, and when they rolled out again. She lay down on her sleeping bag and did not sleep. At 5:45, she heard them. 18 engines. Coming from the north. She was already moving. 2 miles on Route 12 in August. Barefoot, before sunrise, on asphalt that held the previous day's heat in its surface like a stone. She ran the first mile. Walked the second when her right foot started bleeding, where the road edge had cut it. She reached Harlan's Gas and Supply at 6:41. 18 Harleys were lined up at the pumps. Men in leather vests with road dust on their shoulders, checking tire pressure, passing water bottles, laughing about something at the front of the line. On the back of every vest, a large embroidered patch, a mountain ridge in black thread over an iron wheel, the words Iron Ridge Brotherhood, arching top and bottom in worn gold lettering. Road worn, real, a group at ease, a group that had no idea. She stood at the edge of the forecourt for 11 seconds. 11 seconds of every voice Kettleton had ever used on her running through her head at once. Get out. You're not wanted here. She's not all there. Move along. Don't come back. Then she heard Ruth's voice underneath all of them. You do it anyway, baby. Lily walked straight into the middle of 18 strangers and said the thing she knew. She said it twice before anyone paid attention. The first time, a big man with a handlebar mustache turned around and looked at her the way you look at something that has wandered into the wrong place. The second time, he laughed. The third time, she said the name. Dale Whitmore, Copper Spike Bar, second span, and the engines started. One by one, the bikes roared back to life. The formation reassembled. In 90 seconds, they'd be on Route 12. Lily didn't move. She stood in the forecourt of Harlan's Gas and Supply, with 18 engines shaking the air around her, and tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face, and Ruth Carver's voice in her chest, like a coal that wouldn't go out. She had done it anyway. It hadn't worked. Then a voice cut through the noise from the back of the pack. "Everybody shut your engines off." Dale Whitmore had not always been a man who planned to kill people. He'd been a lot of things before that. A decent high school football player. A passable husband for 11 years before Sandra left and took the kids to Tuscaloosa. A bar owner who, for the first 6 years, had actually run a decent place. Cold beer, good jukebox, a kitchen that did a respectable pulled pork on Fridays. The Copper Spike on Cumberland Street had been his father's before it was his. Lester Whitmore had built it in 1987 with money from selling the family farm and 30 years of stubbornness that was either admirable or destructive, depending on who you asked. Dale had inherited it at 41 when Lester's heart gave out on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had run it the only way he knew how, which was the way his father had, which was not a good way, which was the way of a man who believed that if you kept the lights on long enough, something would eventually turn around. Nothing turned around. The highway bypass had killed the Copper Spike slowly over 9 years. When Route 12 was the only road south, the bar filled up every weekend with travelers and truckers, and anyone moving between Birmingham and the coast. After the bypass opened in 2011, that traffic didn't stop. It just stopped stopping. Kettleton became a town you drove past rather than through, and the Copper Spike became a bar where the same 30 people sat on the same stools drinking the same beer, while Dale watched the numbers go the wrong direction month after month after month. He'd borrowed money in 2019 to renovate the kitchen. The renovation took 6 months and cost $40,000 and brought in exactly no new customers because there was no one new to bring in. He'd borrowed again in 2021, $20,000 for new refrigeration units and a sound system that nobody used for live music because he couldn't afford to book anyone worth listening to. The man he borrowed from both times was not a bank. His name was Gerald Foss. He ran a financing operation out of a commercial property on the outskirts of Anniston that listed itself as a business consulting firm. Gerald Foss did not consult. Gerald Foss lent money at rates that were not discussed on paper, on timelines that were not written down, with consequences that were communicated verbally in the back booth of the Copper Spike over bourbon at closing time. By March of this year, Dale owed Gerald Foss $63,000. Gerald Foss had come to see him in April, sat in that same back booth, finished his bourbon, slid the empty glass to the center of the table and said, in the same quiet voice he always used, that he would need the full amount by the end of August, or he would begin collecting in other ways. He did not specify what other ways meant. He didn't need to. Dale had driven home that night and sat at his kitchen table until 2 in the morning, trying to find a number that worked. There was no number that worked. And here is where a man makes the choice that defines him. Not the big dramatic choice. The quiet one. The one made alone at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning with no one watching. Dale made his. The plan came to him in May. He wasn't proud of it later. He told himself that, in the moment it came to him, it didn't feel like a plan to kill anyone. It felt like a plan to take something from people who wouldn't miss it because they'd be gone. He told himself that later, and he knew while he was telling it that it wasn't true, and he told it anyway, because that is what people do with the things they can't look at straight. The Iron Ridge Brotherhood rode through Kettleton every summer, had done for 11 years. Dale knew their route because everyone in Kettleton knew their route. 18 Harleys moving south on Route 12 in formation was not something a town of 4,000 missed. He'd served them at the Copper Spike 3 times over the years. Good tippers. Cash. He knew what they carried. Saddlebags loaded for a 3-week road trip. Cash. Because men who ride don't always trust cards on the road. Watches, wallets, phones, gear. 18 of them. He knew Route 12 south of town dipped down into the Harlan Creek Valley and crossed the old bridge, the one nobody used anymore, the one the county had stopped maintaining, the one that sat over 30 feet of dry limestone creek bed in August. He knew because he'd driven it, measured the drop with his eyes, calculated the distance. He told himself no one was supposed to die. The bridge would fail. The bikes would go down. By the time anyone reached them, 10 minutes minimum from the nearest house, longer if the dispatcher was slow, Dale and 2 men he trusted would be at the creek bed collecting what the wreckage left behind. He told himself the fall was survivable. He had not looked up the physics. He had not wanted to. He recruited 2 men in June, Travis Mead, who did odd jobs and owed Dale $400 and didn't ask questions. Kenny Sutton, who had done a stretch at Limestone Correctional for aggravated robbery and whose judgment Dale had always trusted for the specific reason that Kenny didn't have much of it, and therefore didn't second-guess orders. He rented the angle grinder on a Thursday from Kettleton Hardware, cash, no ID required for tool rental under $75. A detail Dale had confirmed in advance by calling from a payphone. He told the kid behind the counter he was cutting rebar on a deck project. The kid didn't care. They drove out to the bridge at 11:40 in the evening, on the Saturday before the Iron Ridge Brotherhood was scheduled to come through. Dale had confirmed the schedule from a Veterans Motorcycle Alliance event listing online. Public information, posted 3 weeks in advance. He parked the truck 50 yards up Route 12 with the headlights off. They went under the bridge at 11:52. Travis ran the grinder. Kenny held the work light. Dale watched. It took 38 minutes to cut 5 of the 8 primary support beams on the west span. Diagonal cuts, angled to maximize structural failure under dynamic load. Dale had watched 4 YouTube videos on structural failure to understand the angle. Each cut went to approximately 80% depth, enough steel remaining to hold the bridge's static weight. Not enough to hold 18 motorcycles at speed on a downhill grade. At 12:31 in the morning, they were done. Dale looked at the cuts. 5 bright silver diagonal wounds in old steel, still gleaming in the work light. He felt something move through him that he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not satisfaction, not guilt, something between them. The feeling of a door that has been opened that cannot be closed again. "Let's go," he said. They went up the embankment, loaded the grinder into the truck bed, and drove back toward town. Dale did not look in the rearview mirror. He did not know that 11 feet below him, pressed against the east abutment in the dark, a 21-year-old woman was counting seconds and not breathing. The next morning, Dale was at Harlan's Gas and Supply at 6:15. He told himself he was buying coffee. He told himself he just wanted to see the group roll through and confirm the route. He told himself a lot of things that morning. He was on his second cup when he heard the engines. 18 of them, coming down Route 12 from the north, chrome catching the early light. They pulled into the forecourt in formation, bikes finding the pumps like they'd done it 100 times. Dale stayed in the doorway. He watched them fuel up, watched them check tires, pass water bottles, study a map spread across the lead bike's seat. Big group, road-worn, easy with each other, the way men are easy who have been through things together. He looked at their faces. He looked away. Then a movement at the far edge of the forecourt. Someone coming in off Route 12 on foot, barefoot, running, or what was left of running after 2 miles of hot asphalt. A young woman in an oversized jacket with a torn sleeve, hair matted, feet bleeding at the edges. Dale's stomach dropped. He knew her. He knew her because he had said her name 8 hours ago under a bridge. She's not here. Hasn't been here in 2 nights. He had been wrong. She walked straight into the middle of 18 strangers and started talking. Dale set down his coffee cup. He did not move from the doorway. He watched her talk, and watched them dismiss her, and watched the engine start again, and told himself it was over. It was fine. She was nobody. Nobody would listen. Then the man at the back of the pack said 4 words, "Shut your engines off." And Dale Whitmore understood, standing in the doorway of a gas station with a cold coffee cup in his hand, that the door he had opened at 12:31 in the morning was not going to close the way he'd planned. He did not run. He thought about it. He looked at the side lot and looked at his truck, and thought about it for 3 full seconds. Then he stayed. He told himself later that he stayed, because running would have confirmed everything. That was part of it. The other part, the part he didn't say out loud for a long time, was that somewhere between the doorway and the decision, he looked at the girl walking away down the creek path with those 18 men following her, barefoot and bleeding, leading them to the things she knew and they didn't, and something in him understood what he was looking at. He just didn't know yet what to do with it. Jack Mercer made 2 calls from the creek bank. The first was to the FBI field office in Birmingham. He gave them a location, a name, and 4 words that moved things fast. Documented evidence of sabotage. The agent on the other end asked 3 questions, confirmed the address twice, and said 90 minutes. The second call was to Reed. Get everything, every beam, every cut, timestamps on every frame. Reed was already recording. Jack climbed back up the embankment and looked at the group assembled on the path. 17 men waiting. Nobody asking questions. Nobody checking their watch. Whitmore's bar, Jack said. Cumberland Street. We go now, before the FBI gets here, before he has time to think. He paused. We're not touching him. We're not threatening him. We walk in, we surround him, and we wait. Bobby Crane cracked his knuckles. Bobby, Jack said. I know, Bobby said. I know. 18 motorcycles on Cumberland Street at 9:40 in the morning. They came in from the north end and cut their engines at the same moment. A wall of silence that rolled down the block and hit the Copper Spike's front window like a pressure wave. A woman walking her dog on the opposite sidewalk stopped and stared. The mechanic at the garage 2 doors down put down his wrench. The Iron Ridge Brotherhood filed off their bikes in formation. No rushing, no noise. The deliberate, unhurried movement of men who had learned in other contexts that speed is not always the point. Presence is the point. Jack went in first. The Copper Spike smelled like stale beer and industrial cleaner, and the particular staleness of a bar that opens too early because the owner has nowhere else to be. Low light. 4 stools at the bar, 2 of them occupied by men nursing coffee and not looking up. A flat screen in the corner, running a morning news channel with the sound off. Dale Whitmore was behind the bar polishing a glass. He looked up when the door opened. He saw Jack. He kept polishing. 2 men took the back exit. 2 stayed at the front door. The rest spread through the room. Not rushed, not aggressive, just present, filling the space the way water fills a vessel, completely and without gaps. The 2 men at the bar stools looked up, looked around, and quietly put money on the counter and left. Dale set the glass down. Can I help you, gentlemen? Not a question. The voice of a man who had decided on a posture and was committed to it. Dale Whitmore, Jack said. Who's asking? The 18 men you tried to kill last night. The glass Dale had just set down shifted half an inch on the bar. His hand had moved. Just slightly. Just enough. A man who didn't know what Jack was talking about would have been confused. Dale was not confused. I don't know what you're referring to. Jack put both hands flat on the bar. He spoke at the same volume he'd used all morning. Calm. Precise. The voice of a man delivering information he has already confirmed. Harlan Creek Bridge. West span. 5 primary support beams cut with a 4-inch angle grinder between 11:52 and 12:31 last night. Your truck, dark blue Ford F-150, Alabama plate starting 774, parked 50 yards north on Route 12 with the headlights off. He paused. You told your men, and I'm quoting a witness, 18 bikes at full speed. She won't hold past the second span. The color left Dale's face. Not white, gray. The specific gray of a man watching every calculation he's made collapse simultaneously. Whoever told you that is currently at the bridge with a retired Navy structural engineer and a phone camera that has been recording since 7:04 this morning. Jack straightened up. The FBI field office in Birmingham is 90 minutes out, maybe less. He looked at Dale steadily. You've got time to sit down. Dale didn't sit. He stood behind his bar and looked from face to face. 16 men arranged through his bar, 2 at his exits, 1 in front of him, looking for a crack in the formation. There was none. These were men who had held positions in worse places than a bar on Cumberland Street. I want a lawyer, Dale said. That's your right, Jack said. Make the call. Dale reached under the bar. 4 men moved forward simultaneously, not grabbing, not touching, just closing the distance. Dale's hand came back up with a cell phone. He dialed. No answer. He dialed again. The door to the back office was 3 feet to Dale's left. His eyes moved to it once. Reed Halston was already positioned at the end of the bar, between Dale and the office door, arms folded, watching. Dale put the phone down. He started. Dale! The voice came from the front door. Everyone turned. Sheriff Roy Cobb walked in with his hand on his belt and his chest forward, the posture of a man arriving to take control of a room. He was 54 years old, 22 years in the Kettleton Sheriff's Department. the last 9 as chief. He had the specific confidence of a man who had never walked into a room in this town and not been the most important person in it. He stopped when he saw 18 bikers looking at him. His hand dropped from his belt. Roy, Dale said it quietly. Just the name. The way you say a name when you need someone to understand the situation without being told. Roy Cobb looked at Dale, looked at Jack, looked at the room. What's going on here? He said. Sheriff. Jack turned to face him. Glad you could join us. We have your friend here on attempted destruction of evidence. And we have you on video from this morning declining to investigate a documented crime scene after being presented with physical evidence by a retired Navy structural engineer. He let that sit for a moment. You want to tell us how you knew Lily Carver's name this morning without anyone introducing her? The silence in the room changed. Bobby Crane looked at Jack, then at Cobb, then back at Jack. Cobb's jaw tightened. I've known that girl for... You called her by her last name, Jack said, at the bridge, before she'd said a word to you, before anyone in our group had said her name in your presence. He paused. That's a small detail, Sheriff. The FBI will probably ask you about it. Cobb looked at Dale. Dale looked at the bar. Roy, Dale said again. Quieter this time. Cobb's hand moved back toward his belt. Sir. Vic Donahue's voice came from the left side of the room. Quiet. Absolute. He was standing 6 feet from Cobb, with his hands at his sides, and his eyes level. I wouldn't. Cobb's hand stopped. 3 seconds of silence. Then Dale's eyes went to the office door again. Reed, Jack said without turning around. Reed was already moving. He went around the end of the bar, pushed open the office door, stepped inside. A metal trash can near the desk was smoking. Papers curling black at the edges, corners gone to ash. Reed pulled the can away from the desk with one hand and stamped out the remaining flame with his boot. Burning documents, he called out. His voice was flat and informational. Equipment rental receipt. Looks like a tool rental. Thursday, cash transaction. A printed map of Route 12. Bridge location circled in red marker. He paused. And what looks like a handwritten schedule. Dates, times, another pause. August 15th. Iron Ridge Brotherhood. Route 12 South. Dale lunged for the back exit. He made it 2 steps. 3 bikers stepped into his path without grabbing him, without touching him, without a word. A wall, denim and leather, and absolute stillness. Dale stopped. He stood in the middle of his own bar, breathing hard, looking at the floor. You don't understand, he said. His voice had changed. The bar owner voice was gone. What was left was smaller. The bar's going under. I owe $63,000 to a man who doesn't negotiate. I needed... He stopped. You needed our wallets, Bobby Crane said from across the room. His voice was quiet, controlled. The control of a man keeping something in. So you cut a bridge and planned to go through the wreckage. Nobody was supposed to. 30 feet, Reed said from the office doorway. He was holding the partially burned map. On to Limestone. Dry season. 18 riders. He looked at Dale steadily. You did the math, Mr. Whitmore. You watched 4 videos on structural failure to get the cut angle right. You knew exactly what the numbers said. He set the map on the bar. You just decided the answer was acceptable. Dale's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the map on the bar, his own handwriting, the circle in red marker, the bridge he'd stood under at midnight with a grinder in someone else's hands. He looked at it for a long time. Outside, tires on asphalt, the sound of 2 vehicles pulling to the curb. Reed checked his watch. 83 minutes, he said. Faster than I expected. 2 black SUVs, federal plates, 4 agents through the front door, badges out, voices low and efficient. They moved through the room the way people move who have done this before, separating Dale and Cobb immediately. Different corners, different agents, different questions starting at the same time. One agent came to Jack, young, precise, a notepad already open. You the one who called? I am. Walk me through it. Jack walked him through it, start to finish. The gas station, the girl, the path, the bridge, the cuts, the video, the sheriff who knew a name he shouldn't have known. He spoke for 6 minutes without stopping, and the agent wrote and didn't interrupt. When Jack was done, the agent looked up. The witness, he said. The woman who came to you this morning. Where is she? Jack looked at the front window. Lily Carver was standing on the sidewalk outside, looking in through the glass. She had Reed's canvas tool bag over one shoulder. She'd carried it back from the bridge without being asked. Bobby's riding gloves still on her hands. Around her on Cumberland Street, people had gathered. 30, 40 of them. Word traveled fast in a town of 4,000. They stood on the sidewalk and in doorways, watching the federal vehicles, watching the bar, watching the girl standing outside it. For the first time in 13 months, every one of them was looking at Lily Carver. Not through her, at her. She didn't look away. Inside the Copper Spike, the agent who had been questioning Dale Whitmore stood up from the table and said something to his colleague. Dale sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the floor. Not calculating anymore, not looking for exits. Just sitting with what he'd done and what it had cost, and what it was going to keep costing for a long time. The agent walked to the back corner, where Roy Cobb was seated, and said something Cobb didn't respond to. Cobb looked out the front window. At Lily, at the crowd around her, at the town he had policed for 22 years, standing on a sidewalk looking at a girl he had told 3 times to stay away from Main Street. He looked back at his hands. 2 sets of handcuffs. 2 men walked to separate vehicles. No sirens. The crowd watched them go in silence. The specific silence of people witnessing something they will be explaining to each other for years. Jack walked out of the Copper Spike and stood next to Lily on the sidewalk. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "It's done," Jack said. Lily watched the second SUV pull away from the curb and disappear around the corner onto Route 12. "Yes," she said. It was the quietest word she'd said all morning, and somehow the most certain. Dale Whitmore's first night in federal custody was in a holding room in Birmingham. He sat at a metal table with a paper cup of coffee that went cold, and a public defender who arrived at 11 p.m. and spent 40 minutes explaining what the evidence against him looked like from the outside. It looked complete. Video documentation of the cuts. Reed Halston's written structural analysis, signed with his Navy engineering credentials. The partially burned rental receipt recovered from the trash can, enough of it legible to confirm a Thursday cash transaction at Kettleton Hardware for a 4-inch angle grinder. The printed Route 12 map with the bridge circled. The handwritten schedule with the Brotherhood's date and route, pulled from a public event listing, and a witness who had been 30 feet away when Dale said the words out loud. The defender laid it out methodically. Dale listened. When the defender finished, Dale asked one question. "The girl. Is she all right?" The defender looked at him. "That's your question." "Yes. She's fine," the defender said. "She's the reason you're here." Dale nodded. He picked up the cold coffee and put it back down without drinking it. "I saw her walking," he said, "at the bridge, when they were going down to look." He said it to the table, not to the defender. Barefoot, leading them down that path. "And I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I knew that bridge better than anyone in Kettleton. I drove it every week for 20 years. I stood under it at midnight, and I looked at those beams, and I did the calculation." He looked up. "I didn't calculate her." The defender waited. "I told Travis she wasn't there," Dale said. "I believed it. I'd convinced myself." He pressed both hands flat on the table. "She was 30 feet away, and I'd decided she didn't exist." He was quiet for a long time after that. "I need to make a statement," he said. "A full one. Everything. Travis Meade, Kenny Sutton, Gerald Foss, all of it." He looked at the defender. "I want it on record that the girl had nothing to do with any of it. I want it on record that she did everything right." The defender wrote something down. "That won't reduce the charges," the defender said. "I know," Dale said. "Write it down anyway." Roy Cobb's interview lasted 4 hours. He did not confess immediately. He asked for his own lawyer, who arrived at 1 in the morning, and advised him to say nothing. Cobb said nothing for 90 minutes. Then the agent across the table put a phone on the surface and pressed play. Cobb's cruiser, parked behind the Copper Spike. 7 separate Thursday nights over 4 months, documented by a trail camera on the adjacent property that the hardware store owner had installed after a break-in the previous winter. 7 nights, same pattern. Cobb's vehicle arriving between 10 and 10:30, leaving between 1 and 2 in the morning. The agent let the footage run without comment. Cobb watched it. "He told me it was insurance," Cobb said finally, "that nobody would get hurt, that the bikes would go down on the far side of the creek where it was sandy." He stopped. I knew about the bridge. I didn't know about the girl. You knew her name this morning, the agent said. At the scene. Cobb was quiet. You'd warned her 3 times, the agent said. You knew exactly who she was and exactly where she slept. And when she showed up at that bridge with 18 bikers and a structural engineer and a phone full of video, you called it wear and tear and walked back to your vehicle. Cobb's lawyer put a hand on his arm. Cobb moved his arm away. I know what I did, Cobb said. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the interview. He didn't need to. He signed the statement at 3:40 in the morning and sat with his hands folded on the table while the agent gathered his paperwork. And he looked like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally put it down, not because he wanted to, but because he'd run out of road. Travis Meade and Kenny Sutton were picked up by Limestone County Sheriff's deputies before noon. Travis gave a full statement in 20 minutes. He described the rental, the drive, the cuts, the angle Dale had specified, the amount of time each beam took. He said he hadn't known anyone was sleeping under the bridge. He said he'd thought about it afterward and hadn't slept well. Kenny said less but confirmed everything Travis said. Gerald Foss was picked up in Anniston 2 days later. His lawyer was considerably more expensive than Dale's. It didn't make the evidence go away. The Iron Ridge Brotherhood did not leave Kettleton that day. Jack made the call from the sidewalk outside the Copper Spike, standing next to Lily while the federal vehicles were still pulling away from the curb. Memphis, Bobby said. Memphis waits, Jack said. We've got something to do here first. Nobody argued. They set up in the empty lot behind Harlan's Gas and Supply. Tommy Garrett unlocked the side gate without being asked and brought out an extension cord and a water hose and didn't say anything about it, which was exactly right. Tents went up in 18 minutes. Bedrolls, tool bags, coolers arranged in a tight perimeter. Bobby Crane built a fire ring from cinder blocks he found stacked behind the station. By sunset, it looked less like a campsite and more like a forward operating base, because that was what it was. Day 1, Jack made calls. He sat on an overturned milk crate with a spiral notebook and his phone and worked through a list for 4 hours straight. The Veterans Motorcycle Alliance Regional Office in Atlanta. The Wounded Warriors Foundation. 2 former Marine captains he'd served with, who now ran construction companies in Georgia and Tennessee. A journalist at the Birmingham News, who answered on the second ring. By 10 that night, a GoFundMe page titled Lily's Bridge had been shared 1,400 times. Day 2, Reed went to work. He was at Harlan Creek Bridge at 5:45 in the morning, with a full structural assessment drawn up in his notebook. Materials list, load calculations, repair sequence, timeline. He walked into Kettleton Hardware when it opened at 7, put the list on the counter, and said to the owner, whose name was Doug Patterson, and who was 61 years old, and had operated the store for 30 years, I need everything on this list. We're fixing the bridge your town let someone destroy. Doug Patterson looked at the list. He looked at Reed. When do you need it? Today. Doug Patterson didn't charge them a cent. The bikers split into crews by 8 in the morning. 4 on demolition, cutting out the damaged beams with torches and a hydraulic jack. Reed had sourced from Walter Pruitt's shop. Walter had driven his pickup to the bridge at 6:30 without being asked, opened his tailgate, and unloaded every tool he owned. Figured you could use some help, he said to Jack. We could use about 30 people, Jack said. Walter nodded. Give it a couple hours. He was right. By 9, 8 townspeople had shown up at the bridge. By 11, 22. By early afternoon, the creek bank looked like a barn raising. People who had not spoken to each other in months working side by side, passing steel, holding ladders, sharing coffee from a thermos that got refilled 3 times. Lily worked alongside them. She showed up at the bridge at dawn on the second day wearing Reed's canvas gloves. Nobody told her to come. Nobody told her not to. She hauled materials, held flashlights while Reed checked measurements, carried water up and down the bank without stopping. She worked until dark and came back before sunrise. On the 3rd morning, Mrs. Hargrove arrived. She drove her station wagon to the bridge site and parked on the verge and sat in the driver's seat for 2 full minutes before she got out. Then she opened the tailgate and started unloading. Sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, bottles of water, a foil pan of biscuits still warm from the oven. She set up a folding table under the oak tree at the top of the bank. She arranged everything carefully. straightened the napkins twice. Then she walked down to where Lily was kneeling on the bridge deck, holding a bolt in place while Reed tightened the nut from below. Lily. Lily looked up. Mrs. Hargrove was standing there with a sandwich in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Her eyes were red at the rims. She had the look of a woman who had been thinking about what she was going to say for 2 days and had decided that none of it was adequate. "I called the police on you," she said, "twice, for standing in my doorway out of the rain." Lily didn't say anything. "I told you that you were bad for business." Mrs. Hargrove's voice broke on the last word. "Held. You were cold and wet, and I told you that." She stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am so sorry." Lily reached up and took the sandwich. "Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove," she said. That was all. No speech. No performance. A sandwich accepted quietly, the way Ruth Carver would have accepted it, with the understanding that forgiveness is not a ceremony, it is a decision, and the decision had been made. Mrs. Hargrove pressed her free hand against her mouth and walked back to the folding table. She fed people for the rest of the day. Day 4. Day 5. The bridge grew stronger by the hour. New I-beams seated and welded. Reinforced connection plates on every joint. Fresh concrete poured on the abutment faces where the original had cracked with age. Reed inspected every weld twice and signed off on the structural certification with a stamp he'd kept in his kit since his last Navy inspection in 2019. On the evening of the 5th day, Jack stood in the center of the completed bridge and looked at the creek below and made a phone call. Then he gathered everyone, bikers and townspeople together on the bank, and said 5 words. "The bridge is done. We're not." The GoFundMe had crossed $114,000 that morning. Jack had a plan for every dollar. On the morning of the 6th day, he told Lily they were going for a walk. She didn't ask where. She'd learned that Jack Mercer didn't explain things until they were ready to be explained. She pulled on Reed's gloves and followed him down Main Street. The town felt different. A man she'd never spoken to nodded from across the street and said good morning by name. She almost stopped walking. Jack turned onto Sycamore Road. Lily's steps slowed. She hadn't walked this street since February. She'd avoided it the way you avoid a specific memory. Not because you've forgotten it, but because remembering it with your whole body in the place where it happened is a different thing entirely. And sometimes you're not ready for that. At the end of the block, number 47, the porch had new boards, pale against the weathered siding. The roof was fresh, gray composite shingles, clean lines. The screen door had been rehung straight. The porch light was on, even in the daytime. Ruth had always left the porch light on. The front door was painted yellow, not the color it had been before, a new color. But Ruth had always said she wanted yellow, and had never gotten around to it, and whoever had made this decision had somehow known that, or guessed it exactly right. Lily stopped on the sidewalk. "What is this?" she said. Jack walked up the steps and opened the door. Inside smelled like fresh paint and sawdust, and something underneath that. Something that lived in the walls of a house that had been loved for a long time. The floors were sanded and sealed, the wood pale and clean. The kitchen had new laminate countertops. Simple, nothing expensive. The living room had a couch and a reading lamp and a bookshelf. The bookshelf was full. Lily walked to it. Her fingers moved across the spines. Engineering, history, the Tennessee Valley Authority. 3 books on structural mechanics she'd been on the county library waitlist for since spring. "Mrs. Patterson at the library picked them," Jack said from behind her. "She said she knew what you'd want." Lily's hand stopped on the spine of the TVA book. She walked to the back bedroom. On the nightstand, a framed photograph. Ruth Carver, sitting on the Sycamore Road porch in the summer, the old swing behind her, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, squinting into the sun and smiling the way she smiled when she didn't know someone was taking a picture, completely, without arrangement. Lily picked it up with both hands. "Walter found it," Jack said from the doorway. Someone had sold a box of things from the house after the bank cleared it. Pawn shop on Dexter Avenue. Walter bought the whole box 8 months ago. He'd been keeping it in his shop. Lily sat on the edge of the bed. She held the photograph against her chest, and she cried. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind she'd taught herself over 13 months of needing to be invisible and silent and small enough that nobody had a reason to move her along. The other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below control. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes it impossible to speak and doesn't ask your permission. Jack stood in the doorway and said nothing. He'd been in enough hard places to know that some moments don't need anything added to them. When she finally looked up, face streaked, eyes swollen, she asked the question she'd been carrying since the gas station forecourt. Why? You don't know me. Jack was quiet for a moment. I know you ran 2 miles barefoot to warn 18 strangers, he said. I know you stood in the middle of us and said the true thing when every voice in your head was telling you it wouldn't work. He paused. And I know I had a friend, Marcus Webb, did 2 tours with me in Fallujah. Came home. The VA lost his file, lost his housing, lost everything in a system that decided his paperwork mattered more than he did. He stopped. He didn't make it. And I think about what would have been different if one person had just stopped. He looked at her. I'm stopping, he said. That's all. Outside, Sycamore Road was full of people. The 18 bikers lined the curb, helmets off. Walter Pruitt stood at the end of the row with his arms folded. Tommy Garrett was there, still in his gas station shirt. Mrs. Hargrove stood on the sidewalk with her hand over her mouth. People Lily had passed on the street for 13 months without a word. All of them here, all of them looking at the yellow door of 47 Sycamore Road. Someone had hung a banner between the 2 oak trees across the street. A bedsheet, black spray paint, uneven letters. Kettleton stands with Lily Carver. It wasn't straight. It wasn't professional. It was perfect. Lily walked to the porch and looked out. The new mayor of Kettleton, Sandra Oaks, appointed 3 days after Roy Cobb's arrest triggered an emergency council session, stepped forward from the crowd. Lily, she said, on behalf of the Kettleton Town Council, I'm announcing the Ruth Carver Community Fund. Emergency housing, meals, and educational support for any resident of this county who needs it. She held out an envelope. And this. Lily walked down the steps and took it. A scholarship letter. Calhoun Community College, full tuition. Books, fees, housing stipend. Funded jointly by the Veterans Motorcycle Alliance Southeast Chapter and matched dollar for dollar by the state of Alabama. Lily looked up at the crowd. Walter Pruitt, arms folded, smiling the way he smiled. Small, certain, real. Tommy Garrett wiping his eyes with the back of his wrist. Mrs. Hargrove with both hands pressed together in front of her mouth. Jack Mercer at the back of the group, not in the center, not making a speech, just standing there, the way a man stands when he's done what he came to do and doesn't need anything back for it. He caught her eye, nodded once. She nodded back. The applause started everywhere at once. 6 months later, Lily Carver sat in the front row of a structural engineering lecture at Calhoun Community College. Notebook open, pen moving, hand up before the professor finished the question. She carried her books in a canvas bag Reed Halston had mailed from Virginia, the same one he'd used in the Navy for 22 years, worn at the corners, a small anchor patch stitched on the front flap. Inside the front pocket, wrapped in a Pruitt's auto receipt, was Walter's flashlight. She didn't need it anymore. She kept it anyway. Dale Whitmore pleaded guilty in September. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit, destruction of critical infrastructure. The federal sentencing guidelines put him at 12 to 15 years. His lawyer negotiated nothing. There was nothing to negotiate. The evidence was complete, and Dale had declined to contest any of it. At the sentencing hearing, Dale was given the opportunity to speak. He stood up. He looked at the courtroom, the federal prosecutor, the agents, the court reporter, and then he looked at Lily, who was seated in the second row with a notepad on her knee and a pen in her hand, the way she sat everywhere now. He spoke for 4 minutes. He said he had done the calculation wrong, not the structural one. That one he'd gotten exactly right. He'd done the human one wrong. He had looked at 18 strangers on motorcycles and seen a problem to be solved, and he had looked at a 21-year-old woman sleeping under a bridge and seen no one at all. He said those 2 errors were the same error, made from the same place, and that the only reason he was standing in a courtroom instead of a cemetery was that the person he had decided didn't exist had decided to exist anyway. He said he was sorry. He said it once, clearly, without decoration. Then he sat down. Lily wrote 2 words in her notepad. She didn't show them to anyone. But later, in the car back to Kettleton, when Sandra Oaks asked her how she felt, Lily looked out the window at the Alabama tree line moving past and said, like it's over. She paused. Like it can be over now. Sandra glanced at the notepad on Lily's knee. The two words were still visible. They read, "I heard." She didn't say anything. She just drove. Roy Cobb was convicted on 2 counts in October: obstruction of justice, failure to act on a reported felony. He received 18 months and a permanent revocation of his law enforcement credentials. He did not speak at sentencing. He sat with his hands folded and his eyes down and accepted it the way a man accepts something he has known was coming for a long time. Gerald Foss was indicted on federal loan sharking and extortion charges in November. His expensive lawyer got 1 count reduced, the others held. Foss was looking at 7 years minimum and seemed genuinely surprised by this, which said something about how long he'd operated without consequence. Travis Mead received a suspended sentence and 2 years probation. He'd cooperated fully and immediately, and the prosecutor took that into account. He moved to Decatur in December and got a job in a warehouse, and as far as anyone in Kettleton knew, had not looked back. Kenny Sutton took a plea, 3 years, Limestone Correctional, a place he knew well enough to navigate. He didn't seem particularly affected by any of it, which was either resilience or something else, and the distinction probably mattered, but nobody in Kettleton spent much time on it. The Ruth Carver Community Fund opened its doors on the 1st of October. A converted storefront on Main Street, 2 doors down from Hargrove's General. Sandra Oaks cut the ribbon. Walter Pruitt stood in the back with his arms folded and his good shirt on. Tommy Garrett came on his lunch break and stayed for 3 hours helping set up furniture. Mrs. Hargrove ran the kitchen. She closed Hargrove's General on Sunday mornings to cook pot roast, cornbread, sweet potato pie. She never talked about the day she'd called the police on Lily for standing in her doorway in the rain. She didn't need to. Everyone in Kettleton knew what she did on Sunday mornings, and that was a different kind of accounting, the kind that gets settled over time through action rather than apology. Nobody in Kettleton slept outside anymore. That was the measure. That was the number that mattered. Walter Pruitt still left brown paper bags on the railing of Harlan Creek Bridge, old habit. Except now they were addressed to no one in particular, left for whoever might need them. Sometimes they came back with a note tucked inside. Sometimes they came back empty and folded neatly, which meant someone had eaten and had been raised to clean up after themselves. Walter considered both outcomes equally good. The Iron Ridge Brotherhood passed through Kettleton twice a year after that. Spring and fall, 18 Harleys down Main Street, chrome catching the light, engines low. Instead of locked doors and sidewalks that cleared ahead of them, they got waves from doorways and handshakes at the gas station and cold lemonade on Mrs. Hargrove's porch, which she set out every time without being asked, because she had decided this was something she did now, and she was a woman who kept her decisions. Jack Mercer always stopped at 47 Sycamore Road first. He'd sit on the porch swing, Ruth's old swing, new chains, same creak, and Lily would bring 2 glasses of sweet tea and they'd talk. About school, about the TVA book she'd finally finished, and the 3 more she'd found on the same subject, about Marcus Webb, sometimes, and what it meant to be the person who stopped, about what Kettleton looked like from the porch of a house with a yellow door and a light that stayed on. Sometimes they didn't talk about anything in particular. Sometimes that was enough. Harlan Creek Bridge had a new sign on the west railing. Small, steel-faced county standard lettering. Someone had filed the paperwork through the transportation department, and the county commissioner had approved it without much discussion, because by that point, the story had been in the Birmingham News and picked up by 3 national outlets, and nobody on the county commission wanted to be the person who said no to a sign. It read, Lily's Bridge, underneath, in smaller letters, because one voice was enough. Tommy Garrett said it best. A journalist from Birmingham came through Kettleton in November doing a follow-up piece, and Tommy was the one she found willing to talk, leaning against the pump at Harlan's Gas and Supply, the same pump Lily had stood next to on that August morning, the same forecourt where 18 engines had gone quiet because one man decided to listen. What changed? The journalist asked. Tommy thought about it for a moment. I think we learned, he said, that the person you've been walking past might be the only one who can see what you can't. He looked at the Route 12 South sign at the end of the block, and that ignoring someone long enough doesn't make them wrong. That's the story. A homeless woman, 18 bikers, A bridge that almost killed them all. A town that had to learn, the hard way, the only way some lessons get learned, that the person they'd decided didn't count was the one keeping count of everything. Here's what I keep coming back to. Lily Carver ran 2 miles barefoot on hot asphalt to warn 18 strangers who had never done a single thing for her. She did it knowing they probably wouldn't believe her. She did it after a year of being told, in every way a town can tell a person, that her voice didn't matter. She did it anyway. Not because she was sure it would work, because she was the one who knew, and she understood, the way her grandmother had taught her, the way Ruth Carver had pressed her thumb into the center of Lily's palm and said it like a fact, that knowing and doing nothing is a weight you carry a long time. Think about that. Think about who in your life might be carrying something you haven't stopped to hear yet. Who's been standing at the edge of the room, saying the true thing, and getting told to move along? It doesn't take 18 bikers to change someone's life. Sometimes it takes one person who kills their engine and says, "Say it again, slower. I'm listening." If this story stayed with you, if there was a moment, a detail, something you can't quite shake, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know, which part hit you hardest? If you're new here, welcome. Heart Tales is where stories like this live. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the quietest, most human ways possible. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been around, 3 if you never miss. And before you go, there are 2 more stories waiting for you on screen right now. I think you'll want to stay.